Hello hockey fans, Oddman Rush here and welcome back to another episode of This Week in Hockey, the show where you guys send me a bunch of questions and I attempt to answer them by rambling for about 15 to 20 minutes every single week. You guys know how it goes at this point, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? In this week's video, you guys sent me once again a bunch of different, exciting and very interesting topics to discuss. The formula's pretty clear about 5-6 weeks into this series now, so let's get started, shall we? I'm a busy man, I've got things to do, you're probably busy too. Let's get on with it, alright? First up we have The Weed King. I didn't realise I had royalty watching these videos, your highness, who wants me to discuss the Winnipeg Jets and how they're doing unexpectedly good to start this season. Well, I think you hit the nail right on the head there, Weed King. The Winnipeg Jets are once again having a pretty impressive start to the 23-24 NHL season. Many people didn't really know what to expect of this roster, especially given the fact that they've gone through somewhat of a retool or a reload of their roster. It's not been a full rebuild per se, but they've still got a lot of the old guard like the Mark Scheifeles, the Kyle Connors, the Nikolai Ehlers, Connor Hellebuck obviously in the net holding down the fort very well like he always seems to. But then you've got guys like Cole Perfetti and some of these other younger guys that are joining the roster. They've kind of had a bit of a changing of the guard for some of these younger Jets players to come in, and they seem to be getting the job done, whether it's they've had some extra time down in the minors the last year or so, had another year of seasoning in the major junior leagues in North America. But yeah, the Winnipeg Jets are once again doing a fantastic job. They are currently 10th place in the NHL standings at the time of this recording. They have a record of 14-8-2, and I mean, like I said, the old guard really leading the way. Mark Scheifele, 27 points in 24 games played this season. Kyle Connor, 26 points in 24 games, 15 of which are goals, which is very impressive. You got Josh Morrissey, their star anchor on the defense on that first pair, 20 points in 24 games, but he's also a +5 as well, because Mark Scheifele and Kyle Connor, you know they're going to put up points, but Scheifele's a -1, Connor's a -6, but you have Josh Morrissey doing a fantastic job as a +5. You've got Cole Perfetti, one of those younger guys I mentioned, 19 points in 24 games as an early 20-year-old is very impressive. Add to that the +7 rating as well, and he's doing a fantastic job with about 14 minutes average time on ice every single game. Ehlers hasn't really had the best start to the season with 14 points in 24 games, but Nino Niederreiter, they picked him up as a kind of a middle six, top 9 depth scoring guy. He's managed to get himself a contract extension with the Winnipeg Jets because they seem to be so happy with him, and he seems to be very happy playing in Winnipeg at the moment. So Niederreiter with 14 points in 24 games. The new captain of the team, Adam Lowry, following Blake Wheeler's departure, 13 points in 24 games. And then obviously, like I mentioned, you've got Connor Hellebuck, 18 games played so far this season, 11-6-1 record with a .912 save percentage and a .249 goals against average at the time of this recording. Hellebuck, once again, he's a perennial Vezina guy when he's on his game. He has really helped the Winnipeg Jets get the job done here. And like I said, with this Jets team, they've been retooling, they've been restocking some of their prospects, trying to add some younger guys onto the roster. And thankfully, with that combination of the old guard, the guys that have been there for 5, 6, 7 years now, and these young guys coming up and getting the job done and earning those spots in the top 6, in the top 4 defensive pairs, the Winnipeg Jets are getting the job done, and they're a top 10 team in the National Hockey League. I think if you asked most hockey fans, most NHL fans, and even most Winnipeg Jets fans, to be honest, if they thought that over a quarter of the way through the regular season that the Winnipeg Jets would be a top 10 team in the National Hockey League, a lot of them would have said no or would have laughed, you know? If they had been a kind of 21st place to 30th place team, I wouldn't have been surprised having that kind of changeover in their roster, bringing some young, inexperienced NHL players onto the roster, trying to find their rhythm. I wouldn't have been surprised there. The fact that they're a top 10 team in the NHL right now while I'm recording this, with that old guard of the Scheifeles, the Connors, the Ehlers, the Morrisseys, the Hellebucks, that doesn't surprise me either. And that's not even mentioning, within all of this stuff going on, the fact that their head coach, Rich Bowness, had to leave the team very prematurely into the season due to a family issue with his wife and a medical issue with his wife. So the Winnipeg Jets are doing a fantastic job so far this season. I think the big question for them is, can they continue this for the rest of the year? A Vezina-like goaltender in Connor Hellebuck, a guy that holds down the fort like that, can only do that so much every single season, right? And we've seen it in previous years with Hellebuck. He holds down the fort, he plays a ton of games, pretty much more than any other netminder every single season. He puts up really solid numbers, Add to that the players in front of him doing a good job. But then once you get towards the end of the season, if they get to the playoffs, is Hellebuck going to be able to keep that up? Or is it going to be a case of Hellebuck versus the other team and the rest of the Jets roster just can't find their rhythm and they get eliminated from the playoffs, they miss the postseason altogether? Can they keep this momentum going after Christmas, after New Year, into 2024? Can they stay a top 10 team in the NHL? I'm not entirely convinced that's the case. Is it a case of some young guys have just gotten off to really hot starts, but the ebbs and flows and the kind of the fatigue of an 82-game regular season starts to catch up with them? Some of the more experienced guys, do they get off to hot starts because they're wanting those contract extensions or to up their trade value to go to a contender at the deadline? Are they going to slow down as well, or does the team just hit a rut? Because that happens too, right? Will the Jets be able to keep this momentum going for several more months, secure that playoff spot, and give themselves a legitimate chance at the Cup? I don't know. I'm not going to say no, because I think the Jets, if anybody can do it, why not them, right? They've already proven so far this season they're a top 10 team. Can they keep that momentum going? To be honest, I'd really like to see it, actually. I quite like the Winnipeg Jets roster. They're a team that's somewhat of an underdog, I think, in the NHL. Like I said, nobody really expects anything from them, and everybody loves a good underdog, right? So, Winnipeg Jets, let's see if you can keep this up for the rest of the year, but so far, you've done a fantastic job, guys. I like what I see. Next up, we have the Leafs fan who asks, which defenseman do you think will be the best fit for the Toronto Maple Leafs to trade for? Their defense is really bruised up right now. I think that's a really good question, actually, Leafs fan, because as you said, the Toronto Maple Leafs, they're dealing with some struggles on their back end this season, and that's besides the usual issues they have with their back end every single season. For those of you who didn't see the news earlier this week, John Klingberg, one of their big free agent signings this last summer, has gone down with an injury for the rest of the season. He's been shut down for the rest of the regular season, so his $4.5 million cap hit has been freed up, so the Toronto Maple Leafs can go on the hunt for another player. There's been a few different names that have been thrown around. One of them I saw was Rasmus Ristolainen of the Philadelphia Flyers. Whether I think he's going to be a good pick for the Toronto Maple Leafs, I'm not entirely sure. To be fair, last season was one of his best years in the NHL and one of his best years for quite a while, so maybe they look for that offensively minded defenseman who, you know, has some very clear question marks and some very clear issues within his own zone, but so did John Klingberg. So you're essentially replacing one offensively minded, weak defensive blue liner for another one. If they're wanting to keep that same kind of makeup of their back end and their defensive core, then Rasmus Ristolainen could be a good one to look at. That being said, John Klingberg's tenure with the Toronto Maple Leafs to start the year wasn't exactly great, and I think a lot of Leafs fans will agree with me on that one. I have also seen Ilya Lyubushkin's name being thrown around, who obviously was traded to the Toronto Maple Leafs either last season or the season before at the deadline. He's a guy that, you know, blocks a lot of shots, takes a lot of hits. He doesn't really play well offensively. He's very much a defensively minded defenseman, so if the Leafs decide they want to go the complete opposite way from the Klingberg experiment, Lyubushkin could be a good guy to look at. But once again, they've already tried that route with Lyubushkin. Do they really want to go down a route that they've already tried before and didn't work in the long run in the terms of a deep postseason run and a championship? I did also see David Savard's name be mentioned from the Montreal Canadiens as a good guy who's, you know, a pretty decent two-way defenseman. The only issue with him is he's currently injured at the moment. You wouldn't be trading for him anytime soon, and I guess the question mark is when Savard is going to be back. He's also earning a decent chunk of change from the Habs following his Stanley Cup championship with Tampa, signing that contract with Montreal, so I'm not necessarily sure if he would be the best option either. And another name that I saw get mentioned was Chris Tanev as well, who I believe is in his mid-30s, 34 if I'm not mistaken, and he's also quite injury prone as well. So I think the biggest name that I've seen being thrown around quite regularly amongst all of this Toronto trade rumors stuff is Noah Hanifin of the Calgary Flames, who is a guy that has played a very solid defensive game pretty much since he entered the NHL a while ago. He's known as one of those guys that the kind of underlying metrics, he seems to be one of, if not a top defenseman across the league. He clearly gets the job done. He's a good two-way guy. He can produce some offense there. He's a decent offensive-minded defenseman, but he clearly takes care of his own zone first, which I think the Leafs really need. They're kind of begging for as well. So the problem is, though, whether Noah Hanifin is a realistic target for the Maple Leafs. Is this just Leafs fans hoping that they get the best guy available and doing their delusional, let's make a trade offer where we give the other team absolutely nothing, but we get the star player in return so that we can keep our roster as amazing as possible. Unfortunately, that's not how this game and that's not how the business of NHL trades works most of the time. They might be able to fleece Calgary. Several other teams have done so far recently, but whether Toronto is actually able to get Noah Hanifin for a decent amount, whether this trade is even a possibility, we'll have to wait and see. Calgary, they're obviously not doing that great this season, but they still have playoff aspirations, and they've kind of picked it up a little bit in recent weeks, so whether they decide to hold on to Hanifin for the rest of the year, once again, we'll have to wait and see. To be honest, the defenseman market isn't really that great at the moment, seeing as we're about a quarter of the way through the regular season. A lot of teams still have playoff hopes and playoff aspirations. We're not at the point where some teams are so clearly out of it that they're already trying to sell off all of their best players and kind of look towards the future. So I think we'll have to give it a little bit longer, maybe a couple more weeks, maybe up until the new year, around Christmas, New Year, end of January time, to see that gap between the basement dwelling teams and the contending teams and the top teams in the league kind of open up that little bit more, and we get a better sense of, you know, the clear sellers at the deadline, the very obvious buyers at the deadline, certain players that want to be traded, certain players that are on the block as a result of their team's success. So I'm not necessarily sure the Toronto Maple Leafs are going to find that kind of key defensive addition that they're looking for right now or by the end of the year. Obviously, I could absolutely be proven wrong on that, and chances are I will be, knowing how these things go, of course. But like Leafs fan, you mentioned, Toronto, their defensive core is struggling at the moment. It is kind of a prison of their own making, seeing as they went out and got a bunch of kind of spare part defensemen and old aging veterans like Giordano. They went and got John Klingberg, who you know is trying to do everything he can to stay in the league on a consistent basis at this point. But I think there will be some kind of addition for them, especially given that Klingberg's done for the rest of the year. When that's done, I would highly doubt it's going to be before the end of 2023. So good luck, Toronto. I hope you find yourselves a good defenseman. Hopefully you don't pay too much to get him, but a lot of other teams aren't the biggest fan of Toronto, so let's see how much it costs them, okay? And ultimately, we have Tolsman who asks, the Edmonton Oilers need a goalie, but they need to ship off Jack Campbell too. What would a trade and return look like as part of this deal? Now, I think it's fair to say that Jack Campbell's 23-24 NHL season didn't exactly get off to the greatest start, did it? If anything, it was pretty abysmal to say the least, though not entirely his fault if you ask me. Obviously, the buck always stops with the goaltender when it comes to allowing goals and the puck going into your own net, but it is nice when the defenseman in front of you do their job and help the goaltender out, right? And that's not necessarily something that Jack Campbell had a lot of to start this season. Obviously, Jack Campbell having that poor start to the season, especially given the amount of money that he's earning from Edmonton every single season too, he gets demoted to the AHL, joins the Oilers minor league affiliate, the Bakersfield Condors. His start with that team went even worse than his NHL start this season, but thankfully this last week, 14 days or so, he's kind of picked it back up again. He's looking more like the Jack Campbell of seasons past, of Toronto years old, I guess, and he started to pick up some more wins and put up some much better individual stats and individual performances. So that's good for Jack Campbell. He seems to be getting back on it. It's just a shame it's in the AHL and not the NHL, right guys? Now, in terms of an eligible suitor for the Oilers and Jack Campbell, there's a couple of different options available. I've heard kind of the Chicago Blackhawks and Peter Mrazek being thrown around there. Maybe they could make a deal there. Obviously, Peter Mrazek, he didn't have the best of stints with Toronto before going to Chicago, but he seems to have kind of found a bit more of a rhythm with the Blackhawks now. I've seen Carter Hart thrown around with the Philadelphia Flyers, and that kind of seems to be the one that intrigues me the most, especially given that Carter Hart has, for the last kind of 3 to 5 years, been seen as the heir apparent to Philadelphia's crease, and over the last kind of year, 18 months or so, that title has kind of withered away as the months have gone on. He has good games, but he also has bad games too, so he's not really taken on that legitimate 1A starting netminder role. Could a change of scenery be good for Carter Hart? Could going to somewhere like Edmonton do him good? I'm not necessarily sure, because for the lack of help that he had in Philadelphia in seasons past, he might have even less of that in Edmonton, and with their coaching change and with a bunch of stuff going on with the Oilers, so maybe it's not the best choice, but I think Carter Hart is probably the most enticing one for the Oilers to choose. I think if I had to pick a team and a netminder for the Oilers to pursue at this point in time, at the time of this recording, it would be Carter Hart and the Philadelphia Flyers. I have a feeling that those conversations have already been had. There's been rumors floating around about it for several months, especially when the Oilers were on their really poor start to the season. In terms of what the deal would look like, Edmonton is going to have to overpay and overpay heavily. You've got a guy like Jack Campbell who, if I'm not mistaken, is earning $5 million a year on the contract with Edmonton, so they're going to have to give up at least a first round pick. They're probably going to have to retain salary as well in order to just move that contract and get it out of the way. So if we're looking like, I don't know, Jack Campbell with 50% retained, also a first or a second round pick, maybe a second rounder if they can retain 50%. If not, it's absolutely a first round pick for Carter Hart and a third round pick. I'm not going to throw in a bunch of different prospects or other draft picks or other roster guys to try and make this trade salary cap compliant if it isn't already. I'm just thinking hypothetically, Jack Campbell, 50% retained and a first or second round pick for Carter Hart straight up, and a third round pick maybe straight up. I feel like that could be the starting of the conversation between these two teams. Now, whether either of these sides has presented this potential deal to the other side, and whether the other side has either laughed their heads off or been upset of the value going either way, or the feeling they're being stiffed out of decent value, I don't know. I'm not an insider. I don't spoil everything for hockey fans, you know? But I think it'll be really interesting to see if that conversation has been had, and if a trade like this is made, how different it is from that potential, because the Oilers, they're in a position of weakness in this trade, right? You could make the argument that Philadelphia with Carter Hart still not quite finding his rhythm overall. They're not necessarily in the best negotiating point either. However, compared to the Edmonton Oilers, they're looking like kings at the moment, right? They have a player that is in demand, a guy that still is only in his mid-20s, I believe, so still a lot of potential to be able to reach the kind of level that people were expecting of him years ago. And on the flip side, the Oilers have a guy that has clearly regressed. He's in the minors and struggled in the minors when he first got there, and has a monster of a contract that they want to try and get rid of in a very kind of tight salary cap world. They're going to have to be the ones that give something up in order to make this happen. They're going to be the ones that have to sweeten the pot even more in order to get that contract sent over straight off or retain salary. It's going to be a loss, but then it opens up some salary cap for them to maybe make some other moves to tweak the roster elsewhere. Edmonton, give Philadelphia and Carter Hart a try. If not, give the Arizona Coyotes a call. I guarantee you can get a deal done by the end of the year, okay? And finally, we have Drew Nye, who asks, do you watch any other hockey content creators? If so, who do you enjoy watching? Now, I gotta be honest here, Drew, I don't actually watch any other hockey YouTube or any hockey content creators here on the platform. I think with me doing trade school and working at the moment, my time during the weekdays is very limited as it is. So the odd chance that I do get the opportunity to watch any YouTube or any TV, I'm not really picking hockey YouTube or hockey content creators. I think it's because I work in this space as well, and I've been doing these videos for half a decade now as like a legit thing. I don't really have that much interest in watching other people's content on it per se, because I'm so involved in it myself, and I commit a lot of time and effort into the stuff that I do here. So maybe it's just a case of I'm kind of burnt out and want to focus on my other hobbies and my other interests. That being said, I am aware of most of the other hockey content creators out there. I'm aware of their stuff. I have watched them at some point, and they are mad impressive, the stuff that they do. I don't think we can talk about this topic without mentioning the godfather of hockey YouTube, the Hockey Guy, of course. His knowledge of the sport unparalleled. His work ethic is one of the most impressive, incredible things I think I've ever seen on this platform, or any platform in general. The guy just pumps out videos day after day, numerous videos every single day, and you can tell that he actually knows what he's talking about. And not only that, it's a very unbiased view at a lot of different topics and subjects that he covers. He's more just telling it how it is and then explaining his opinion and why he has that opinion on certain things, and using stats, facts to back up his argument or back up the conversation that's being had. And obviously he has the fancy whiteboard behind him, which really helps him, you know. It's almost as if he's giving a lecture, but an interesting one that I want to sit there and take notes, you know. I know that there's Rob Talks Hockey as well. I've been aware of his channel for a while. I've watched a few little videos here and there, and they're mad impressive. He really shot up a few years ago, and it was very impressive what he's been able to do. He's really got that kind of YouTube stuff locked down. He knows the right thumbnails to make, the right titles, and not only that, the content's actually really solid as well. He also has his second channel where he opens hockey cards, which I think is pretty cool as well. Then you've got guys like I Don't Give Kachuk and Lego Rocks Gaming, who also make some pretty solid content from the minimal amount of their stuff that I've seen. But then you've also got those guys who do kind of clips from actual NHL games, and that more sort of John Boy style discussion. I know that you've got Hockey Psychology is one of the big ones at the moment, and those guys seem to be doing a really great job. They've got the titles nailed down, and the discussions that they actually have during the videos and with the clips in the background are quite interesting as well, from the kind of small sample size I've seen as well. And I'm not making any kind of digs at any of these channels to say that my channel's better than theirs or I don't watch their stuff because it's beneath me or anything like that. Not at all. I think it's more just when I have that limited free spare time to be able to not focus on trade school or work or my channel in general. I kind of want to focus on some of my other hobbies like video games or kind of pop culture stuff and all the other stuff that I don't necessarily get the chance to look at in as much detail when I'm working on the channel or doing any of my other commitments. So yeah, props to all of the hockey content creators out there who are doing a fantastic job, that are keeping up with the grind day in, day out. They're doing something that I'm not able to do at the moment anymore, and I have mad respect for them. The more hockey content creators in this space, the better it is, because that means we have more people watching, more fans discussing it, and overall a better time for everyone. So keep it up, guys, if any of you are watching this. If you're not, maybe start a channel and join us. It's a lot of fun, I promise. Hard work, but worth it. And on that rather lovely note, I think I'm going to end today's video. That was the latest episode of This Week in Hockey. What do you guys think about the questions that we covered and the answers that I provided to them? Also, do you have another topic that you'd like me to cover in a future video? Do let me know in the comments below. I would absolutely love to hear what you guys have to say. But thank you so much for watching, guys. I do hope you have enjoyed. Please feel free to like, subscribe, share, watch some of my other videos, all of that stuff. Thank you very much for watching, guys, and goodbye. A big thank you to Bexy93, Burned Retinas, Drew Fawcett, Houston NG, Raquel and Worthless Pieces for helping support this video via Patreon. If you too want to help support the channel a little bit further and get a shout out at the end of every future video, make sure you head over to patreon.com/oddmanrush and become a patron today.